Good morning. On behalf of our family, my father Walter, my sister Debbie, her husband Steve, my wife Eileen, myself, the three grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren, we'd like to thank you for being here to celebrate with us the life of our mother. There's two people in particular that are here that I'd like to mention this morning. The first is our daughter Amanda, who you heard earlier. Unfortunately, is back at the hotel sick with a stomach virus. So she's here, and she's not here physically, but she's here in every other way to support, my mother in the event today. The other is my mother-in-law, Geraldine Christopherson. She lives in New Jersey with us. She's unable to travel, but in the 30-plus years my wife and I have been married, she's a very good Christian woman, and no association with the Army, but she's lived a very Christian life. In the 30 years with while my mother was alive, they had a very close relationship. They didn't see each other a lot, but they were constantly mailing back and communication and by phone and so forth and so on. So I just want to make mention of her and wish she could be with us today. My mother was an only child. Later in life, she reconnected and married Lieutenant Colonel Willard Evans. I'm sorry. I knew I was going to do something. My grandmother, sorry, Dad, I didn't want to shake you up there. My grandmother, Marion O'Neill, reconnected and remarried later in life Lieutenant Colonel Willard Evans. And suddenly we added some Southern members to our Northern family. And finally, my mother had a brother. When she would talk about Commissioner Willard Evans, she never spoke of him as her stepbrother to us or anybody else she came in contact with. He was always her brother. And with that came, as our family, we had a new Uncle Willard and Aunt Marie, and we had two new cousins, Sherry and Willard. They became a very important part of our lives, all of our lives, and just want them to know how much we appreciate them. The Clearwater Corps. My mother, I can't believe that next year will be 25 years since my parents retired and came to the Clearwater Corps. It's hard to believe. She bragged about the Corps an awful lot. She bragged about the band. She bragged about the songsters. She was very musical, my mother, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But she talked about, the large attendances that you would have on Sundays. She talked about, especially when the snowbirds were down from the north and from Canada. And I just want you and everyone else in the Clearwater Corps to know, past and present, what an important part you were of my mother's life. And she appreciated being here at this Corps very much. My mother was very musical, as some of you may or may not know. She was a solo cornetist as a young person in the high school band, and in the Army growing up as a young person, as an adult. She was a very talented vocalist and was asked to sing solos very often, and she played the piano, and which she passed on to my sister to a certain degree. But she was a very musical person, loved music, and that's why I think she talked so much. I believe she was in the songsters here when they first came down for a while. But that's why she talked about the band and the songsters particularly so much, because she loved music. She was the foundation of our family, obviously. She really didn't have any hobbies, or she didn't have a lot of outside interest except for the Army and the family, but she loved being on her computer. She would work on her computer. She would do cards, she would do letters. We have a rather large kind of extended family that goes into Canada and Newfoundland. And she would do a monthly newsletter where she would ask all the members of the family to send something in about their family, and she'd put it all together and send that out. So she really spent a lot of time on the computer and enjoying that. As a good son, I tried to keep in contact as much as possible. I would call on the phone 2 or 3 times a week and talk to both my mom and my dad. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, I made a mistake. And that was one time when I was down here. I was at the mall with my parents. We were having lunch, or we were going to a movie, or we were doing something. Made the mistake of suggesting to them that they get an iPhone. So we bought an iPhone at the mall, and my mother got very interested in it. And instead of the 2 or 3 phone calls a week, I was getting 2 or 3 texts a day from her. And at first it was, good morning, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's the family? How's everything? Then it got into, how do I work this thing? So we, after a few times, I didn't know much more than my mother did. So after a few times, I said, why don't you just call her, just call Amanda, and she'll explain it to you. So they were constantly on the phone. How do I work this button? How do I work this button? And then she got the iPad. And then she started using the iPad more. But that was, in her later years, that's what she really enjoyed doing, was being on the iPhone, texting, and the iPad, and all of that. My mother spent a number of years at camp. Belmont Village, some of you may know and some of you may not know, is part of the Star Lake complex, and she spent probably about 30 years in total managing and running Army camps. I probably spent about 15 of those years, obviously, because when I was young and born, I was following along with her, and as I grew up into a teenager, I was at camp with her most of the time. And then, of course, when I was 14 or 15, like most Salvation Army kids do, is you start working at camp. But those were probably the years that I remember the most and had, the most, I want to say fun or just time with her. And because we were there we were there all year long, but we were there in the summer. And I got to see my mother work. My mother was a very, very capable person. My father often talks about how he married above his level. And, if you're a sports fan, they sometimes say you outkicked your coverage. So that's basically who my mother was. If my mother and my father had not gotten together, I don't think there's anything that my mother could not have done within the Army, because she was very, very capable. But she was very happy being a support person to my dad through his Army career and filling in the niches where she could fill in the niches and where she could, be a part of things. And taking care of the family. And that's basically what she enjoyed and wanted to do. And the things that she did and the assignments that she got through the Army during the years, she did very, very well and performed them very, very well. But really, she was very happy to be in my father's shadows and, shadow and just kind of be a support person to him and to the family. So, obviously, in closing, we're going to miss her very, very much and appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Debbie has asked me to read her tribute to her mom. You would think that after 66 years with my mom, it would be easy to come up with plenty of things to say about her. I have lots of fun memories, fond memories, some of which I will share today, but it's harder to think of the personal ones. Those are the ones hidden deep in my heart and are more difficult to share. Some of you knew Mom as Mrs. Colonel French, some as Margaret French, and some as Peggy French, but I just knew her as Mom. She and I always had a special kind of ESP. If something was going on in the family, she would always know somehow. The one special thing we shared was the TV show, Dancing with the Stars. We would both watch it, me up in Michigan and her down here, and then we would text each other about it. Yes, my mom texted up to the age of 90. She was also on Facebook. If you don't know what that is, just ask a friend. Mom excelled at many things, including being a Salvation Army officer, an officer's wife, a musician, a mom, giving great dinner parties and running summer camps, and she did everything flawlessly. Unfortunately, this apple fell very far from the tree. I remember one time when Brigadier Tommy Gorman came over for dinner and we had spaghetti. I wanted to help and be like Mom. So I brought a big plate of spaghetti out to Tom, tripped on a new throw rug, and the spaghetti landed right in his lap. Of course, I was humiliated and ran to my room in tears. I really wanted to be like Mom, but I couldn't. Nobody could. She was very organized. I am convinced she has been with us while we have been planning this service to make sure we get every detail just right and helping us through these difficult days. There was one thing my mom was not so good at, and that was being a hairdresser. I remember she used to cut my bangs really short, and I would go to bed with Scotch tape on them, hoping they would grow overnight. It never worked. Mom was a very special lady. She always thought of others first, never herself. She was always asking, "Did you eat?" She had many health problems throughout her life, but never complained. Even in the last months, weeks, and even days of her life, we were her first concern, especially Dad. She wanted to make sure we ate, got enough rest, etc. Our family was able to gather down here in late July of this year for an early 90th birthday party for Mom, and that is a memory we will always treasure. We have a picture of her with her cake, and she was so happy she looked like a little kid. We know God had a hand in her passing in more than the unusual way. Let me say that again. We know God had a hand in her passing in more than the usual way. Katie, my daughter, who recently became a nurse, had a strong feeling that she wanted to fly down from Michigan on Sunday to say goodbye to her grandma, and spent the night in her room. I told her I didn't think the nurses would let her do it, and she said, "I'd like to see them try to stop me." We checked with the nurses, and they okayed it, so after getting up at 3 a.m. that morning and flying here from Michigan, Katie went right to Mom's room at Sable Palms and prepared to spend the night with her. We got a call from Katie at 1:30 a.m. letting us know that Mom had passed away, with Katie holding her hand and playing music for her. We know that was God's plan. It is a memory that Katie will always have, and I know it comforts Dad. With all of Mom's accomplishments, her greatest joy was her family. She loved her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren beyond measure, and we loved her the same. I would like to share some Facebook posts from some of the children and grandchildren when they learned of Mom's passing. Rest in peace, Grandma. I'm so glad you waited for me to come. Our hearts are hurting, but we're comforted knowing you're no longer suffering. Heaven has just gained its most faithful servant. We love you. I'm heartbroken to say that Grandma passed away overnight. Heaven has truly gained a faithful servant. I'm glad she's no longer in pain, but I already miss her so much. My grandmother is one of the sweetest women I know. She will be greatly missed, but at least we know that she isn't suffering anymore. I love her so much. Been up all night thinking about you, Grandma. I'm so thankful I got to tell you I love you one more time and hear you tell me back. We've lost such a loving, kind-hearted woman, one of the purest souls to live. That smile, the world already feels empty without you. In conclusion, my mother taught me a lot, or tried to, but she never taught me how to live without her.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, the oldest grandchild. I will now be reading John 14, verses 1 through 4. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. And I would just like to say a few words on behalf of the grandchildren, my sister Katie, my cousin Amanda, myself. Our grandmother was a woman of strength and faithfulness, and she was full of love. She was truly the heart of our family. Our grandparents showed us what love truly means through their devotion to one another. She will be greatly missed. We love you, Grandma. Oh, and by the way, when she texted me, she would use like the abbreviations that the kids today use, and I always bragged about her because I thought it was so cool that my grandma, who was in her 80s, actually not only texted, but she used, the actual abbreviation. She was truly a remarkable woman. Thank you.